In the year 4 BC, a teenage girl in a forgotten village in Galilee received news that threatened not only her reputation, but her very life. Today, 2,000 years later, her name is the most spoken name on the planet, Mary of Nazareth. Maryam for 1.5 billion Muslims, Theotokos, the Mother of God, for 300 million Orthodox Christians, the Virgin Mary for 1,300 million Catholics. A figure respected even by Jews who reject her son as the Messiah. No woman in history has been more venerated. No woman has been more represented in art. No woman has inspired more basilicas, more cathedrals, more prayers, more names given to newborn babies. And yet, we know her far less than we think we do. We don't know the color of her eyes. We don't know her family name. We don't know how many years she lived or exactly where she died. The Gospels mention her only a handful of times, and when they do, it is always in relation to her son, never on her own terms. But we have something better than theological accounts. We have archaeology. We have excavations in Nazareth that show us exactly how Galilean families lived in the first century. We have historical documents about the laws that governed Jewish women. We have anthropology that reveals what domestic life, marriage, childbirth, and child-rearing truly look like. And with all of this, we can reconstruct her life. Today, we are going to walk through the Nazareth she knew. We are going to feel the weight of the water jar she carried on her head. We are going to see how she wove the tunics for her family. We are going to understand what it truly meant to be a woman, a mother, a widow in the ancient world. We are going to meet Mary, not as a golden icon floating above an altar, but as a woman of flesh and blood who ground grain before dawn, who wept over the death of her husband, and who watched her son executed in the most humiliating way Rome had ever devised. This is the story of the woman who changed the world, and we are going to tell it with archaeological evidence, artificial intelligence, and the details that the centuries tried to erase. The archaeological excavations of the last 3 decades have revealed an uncomfortable truth. For those who imagine Mary growing up in a picturesque town with cobblestone streets and whitewashed houses, Nazareth in the 1st century BC was not a town. It was a hamlet. 50 families, perhaps 250 people in total, 4 or 5 acres of land carved into a limestone hill in Lower Galilee. There was no central square, no market, no public buildings, no walls. From a distance, a traveler could pass along the main road without even realizing there was a settlement there. The houses were not standalone structures. They were natural limestone caves, expanded generation after generation using simple iron tools. The soft rock allowed livable spaces to be carved directly into the hillside. Then, with stacked stones and mud mortar, they were extended outward, creating hybrid structures, half cave, half construction. The result was an architecture of functional poverty, cool in summer, relatively warm in winter, and completely free of cost. It only required labor. And in Galilee, labor was the one thing the poor had in abundance. The entire village of Nazareth would fit inside 3 modern football fields. The whole village, every house, every courtyard, every animal pen, every agricultural terrace carved into the surrounding hillsides. Water came from a single spring, Every day at dawn, the women walked to the well with clay jars balanced on their heads. Every day, that was the moment for conversation, for exchanging news, for building the female alliances that kept the social life of the village running. And here, in this place so small that the ancient world did not even bother to record it on its maps, a girl was born who would change the history of human religion. Nazareth is not mentioned in the Old Testament. It does not appear in the writings of Flavius Josephus, the most detailed historian of Judea in the 1st century. It does not appear in the Talmud until centuries later. It was so insignificant that when Nathanael in the Gospel of John asks, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" he was not being cynical. He was simply expressing the common sense of any educated Jew of the time. Nazareth was synonymous with nothing, and yet, here among these caves carved into limestone, among these 50 families who all knew each other, who shared the same well, who celebrated the same feasts in the same tiny synagogue, here lived the woman whose name is spoken more times per day than any other female name in history. There is a theological concept in Second Temple Judaism that is fundamental to understanding who Mary was. The Anawim, the poor of Yahweh. They were not simply people without money. They were those who had been reduced to nothing by the circumstances of life, and who had no hope left but God Himself. They had no land to protect them, no political connections to defend them, no wealth to buy them security, only faith. The prophets had spoken of them for centuries. Isaiah called them the humble and contrite in spirit. The Psalms are filled with their voices. This poor man cried out, and Yahweh heard him. Zephaniah prophesied that the remnant of Israel would be a humble and lowly people who would trust only in the name of the Lord. Mary was a perfect Anawim, a girl from an insignificant village, from a powerless family, from a region that the Jews of Jerusalem despised as a land of the ignorant, mixed with Gentiles. But her material poverty was combined with an extraordinary spiritual richness. The Magnificat, that hymn she proclaimed when she visited Elizabeth, reveals a mind saturated with Scripture. Every line is an echo of the Psalms, of the prophets, of Hannah's song in the book of Samuel. This was not an illiterate girl who barely knew mechanical prayers. This was someone who had absorbed the oral tradition of Israel to a depth that astonished those around her. Someone who could improvise theological poetry on the spot, weaving together biblical references with a personal and revolutionary voice. The Anawim were not passive. Their piety was not resignation. It was spiritual resistance. While the temple in Jerusalem had become an instrument of political control, while the Sadducee priests collaborated with Rome, while the wealthy exploited the poor in the name of ritual purity, the Anawim kept the flame of authentic faith alive. They believed that God had not forgotten the small ones, that the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob still stood, that the Messiah would come, not for the powerful, but for the broken. And Mary, this teenager from Nazareth, was their perfect representative. When the angel calls her full of grace, he is not speaking of some abstract moral perfection. He is recognizing that in this poor girl, in this Anawim with no human power or protection, God had found exactly what he was looking for. Someone who had nothing to lose. Someone whose only wealth was the trust that God keeps his promises. To understand the courage of Mary, we need to understand exactly what it meant to be a woman in the Jewish world of the first century. And the reality is brutally different from anything we know today. A woman was not an independent legal person. She was property, first of her father, then of her husband. If she was widowed without male children, she belonged to her father-in-law or brother-in-law through the practice of levirate marriage. The Mishnah, the compilation of Jewish oral law, states it without ambiguity. A daughter is under the authority of her father in all matters relating to her betrothal. The father literally sold his daughter into marriage. The price, called the mohar, was paid to the father, not to her. A woman could not testify in most legal cases. Her word was worth half that of a man in the few contexts where it was permitted at all. She could not initiate a divorce except under extremely limited circumstances. A man could divorce his wife simply by writing a certificate of dismissal. Family honor depended fundamentally on the sexual purity of women. A daughter who lost her virginity before marriage brought shame not only upon herself, but upon her entire family. The punishment prescribed in Deuteronomy 22 was public stoning at the door of her father's house. It was not a metaphor. It was the law. A woman's monthly cycle rendered her ritually unclean for 7 days. Everything she touched became unclean. Anyone who touched her remained unclean until nightfall. Childbirth left her in this ceremonial state for 40 days if she delivered a boy, 80 days if it was a girl. Formal education was reserved for males. Girls learned at home, from their mothers, domestic skills and oral traditions. Some devout families taught their daughters to read, but that was the exception, not the rule. In the synagogue, women were separated from men. In the Temple of Jerusalem, they could not pass beyond the court of women. The priests were all men. The scribes were men. The Pharisees were men. The teachers of the law were men. Marriage was arranged when girls were between 12 and 14 years old. There was no romantic courtship. There was no personal choice. The father negotiated with the father of the groom. Economic interests and family alliances determined marriages, not love, not compatibility. Once married, a woman's primary role was to bear her husband male children. Barrenness was considered a divine curse and a valid reason for divorce. A woman who bore no sons put her own future security at risk. This was Mary's world, a world where she had no sovereignty over her own life, where her future was decided by men, where her worth was measured by her virtue and her capacity for motherhood. And in this world, a conception outside of marriage was not a social scandal that would fade with time. It was a death sentence. Mary's day began in absolute darkness. There were no clocks, no alarms, no artificial light of any kind. The body woke up to sound, and the sound that defined the dawn across all of Galilee was just one: the constant hypnotic rhythm of grinding stones. Every house had a hand mill, 2 circular stones, one fixed and one mobile, with a wooden axle running through them. The woman would kneel in front of the mill, take hold of the handle on the upper stone, and begin the circular motion that would turn grain into flour. This was not a 10-minute task. To produce enough flour for a family's daily bread, a woman needed to grind for 1 to 2 hours every single day. Without exception, Because bread was baked fresh every morning and flour was not stored already ground, it spoiled too quickly. The sound was everywhere. In every house in Nazareth before dawn, women were grinding grain. The collective sound of stone against stone, multiplied across 50 homes, created a morning symphony that marked the waking of the village. Mary would kneel on the packed earth floor, still in near total darkness, and begin the movement her hands knew by memory. Forward, back, circular. The weight of the upper stone built a very specific musculature in the shoulders and arms. Archaeologists can actually identify the skeletons of women from the ancient world by the asymmetric development of their bones, caused by this very work. While she ground, she prayed. The morning prayers she had learned from her mother, the memorized psalms, the blessings for the grain, for the day, for life itself. When light began to filter through the small openings that served as windows, the next task was waiting. Water. Every day, Mary walked to Nazareth's only spring, carrying a clay jar on her head. The path was not long, but a full jar weighed between 15 and 20 kilograms. Women developed a very specific posture, walking with a perfectly straight back, the muscles of the neck and shoulders bearing the weight on the way home. The well was the female social center of Nazareth. There, the women exchanged news, resolved conflicts, arranged marriages, passed down traditions. It was the only public space that belonged exclusively to them. During certain hours of the day, back home, the bread making began. The oven, called a tabun, was a clay structure in the courtyard. Mary would light the fire with dry branches and dried animal waste. It was the most abundant and affordable fuel available. It was collected, dried in the sun mixed with straw, and stored for cooking. While the oven heated up, Mary kneaded the flour with water, salt, and a small amount of fermented dough saved from the day before. Her hands knew exactly the right texture. Too dry, and the bread would be hard as stone. Too wet, and it would not hold its shape. She shaped flat discs, about the size of a modern dinner plate, and pressed them against the inner walls of the tabun. The bread cooked in minutes, emerging with that aroma that has defined the human home for millennia. This bread was the absolute foundation of the diet. It was not a side dish. It was the meal itself. Everything else, olives, dried figs, legumes, and occasionally fish or cheese, were complements to the bread. An adult consumed between half a kilo and a full kilo of bread every single day. After the bread came the rest of the day, washing clothes at the nearest stream, beating garments against the rocks, weaving at the loom that occupied a corner of the courtyard, mending worn tunics, tending the small vegetable garden, feeding the chickens and goats, if the family had any, preparing the evening meal. The work never ended, and almost all of it was invisible to men, who took it for granted as something that simply happened. Mary lived this life from the moment she was old enough to hold a water jar until the day she died. Decades of invisible work that held family life together. One of the most important and most overlooked tasks of women in the ancient world was textile production. And Mary mastered this craft with the skill that only years of daily practice can give. The process began with raw wool or linen. If it was wool, it first had to be washed to remove the natural grease, the lanolin, which made it stiff and water-resistant. Then it was carded with wooden toothed combs, aligning the fibers in the same direction. Spinning was a constant task. Mary would walk through Nazareth with a distaff in her hand, turning fibers into thread as she moved from place to place. It was not something done sitting quietly at home. It was something done while walking to the well, while watching over small children, while talking with the neighbors. The hand spindle, a wooden rod with a weight at one end, spun constantly between her fingers. The fibers twisted, became thread, were wound up. Months of constant spinning just to produce enough thread for a single tunic. Then came the loom. First-century looms in Galilee were vertical, leaned against a wall. The warp threads hung vertically, weighted down at the bottom with clay loom weights. Mary would pass the shuttle from side to side, weaving the weft between the vertical threads. A simple tunic took weeks. A seamless tunic, like the one Jesus would wear years later, took months of meticulous work. It was woven in one single piece, from top to bottom, without cutting or sewing. Only a highly skilled weaver could produce such a garment. Dyes came from natural sources: red from madder root, blue from indigo, yellow from saffron or turmeric. But dyes were expensive, and the poor families of Nazareth used mainly the natural color of the wool: grayish-white, brown, black. A poor family's clothing consisted of the basics: the inner tunic, a linen or wool garment that reached from the shoulders to the knees or ankles; the outer tunic, thicker, which also served as a blanket for sleeping; the belt, essential for gathering the tunic and creating folds where small objects could be kept; and the cloak, the most valuable garment of all, offering protection from cold, sun, and rain. The law of Moses actually prohibited keeping a poor man's cloak as collateral overnight. It was his only protection, his only blanket. To take it away was to condemn him to the cold. Mary produced every garment her family ever wore, every tunic belonging to Jesus, every cloak of Joseph's, every piece of clothing for her other children, hundreds of hours of work in each one. And when they wore out, she repaired them, patched them, turned them into rags that still had a use. Her hands were constantly working with fibers, constantly spinning, weaving, sewing. They were calloused hands, scarred from the pricks of bone needles, stained with natural dyes that never quite washed out completely. When the Gospels mention that at the crucifixion, the soldiers divided Jesus' clothes among themselves and cast lots for his seamless tunic, they are mentioning more than just a garment. They are mentioning months of Mary's labor, a textile masterpiece that only extraordinarily skilled hands could have produced. Mary did not go to school. In first-century Judaism, formal education was exclusively for males. Boys began at 5 or 6 years old in the synagogue under the instruction of the Hazan. Girls stayed home. But staying home did not mean going without an education. It meant a different kind of education, transmitted orally from mother to daughter, from grandmother to granddaughter. Mary learned the scriptures not by reading expensive scrolls her family could never have afforded, but by listening to her mother recite the Psalms while grinding grain, listening to her father sing the blessings on the Sabbath, listening to the public readings in the synagogue every single week. The human mind, before widespread writing, developed memory capabilities that seem almost superhuman to us today. Mary memorized hundreds of psalms, long passages of the Torah, the canticles of Moses, of Deborah, of Hannah. The Magnificat proves the depth of her formation. When she visited Elizabeth and proclaimed that hymn, she was not improvising from scratch. She was combining biblical references she knew intimately, weaving a new composition from threads she had memorized over years. "My soul magnifies the Lord," echoes Psalm 34. "Because he has looked upon the lowliness of his servant," reflects Hannah's canticle in 1 Samuel 2. "He has brought down the mighty from their thrones," weaves together themes from multiple prophets. This was a mind saturated with Scripture. A girl who had absorbed the oral tradition of Israel to an extraordinary depth. But her education was not only intellectual, it was practical. She learned to grind grain with the efficiency that only daily practice can give. She learned to balance a jar on her head while walking along uneven paths without spilling a single drop. She learned to identify the medicinal herbs that grew on the hills of Galilee. She learned to read the sky, to predict the weather, to recognize the signs of illness in children and animals, to negotiate at the market on the rare occasions when there was something to sell or buy, to resolve conflicts between neighbors without involving the men. She learned the work songs that women sang while grinding, while weaving, while walking to the well. Songs that were centuries old, passed down from generation to generation, that no one ever bothered to write down because they were not considered important. And above all, she learned what it meant to be a woman in a world designed by men, for men. She learned to be unseen when she needed to be strong when there was no other option, to find spaces of dignity in the margins. When Mary was 12 or 13 years old, her informal education came to an abrupt end, because at that age, a Jewish girl stopped being a girl. She became eligible for marriage, and her father began looking for a suitable husband. First-century Jewish marriage had two distinct phases, and understanding this difference is crucial to understanding what happened to Mary. The first phase was called Erusin, the betrothal. The bride's father and the groom negotiated the mohar, the bride price. A legal contract called a ketubah was drawn up. The marriage blessings were pronounced, and from that moment on, legally, the couple was married. But they did not live together. They did not begin their life as husband and wife. They did not share a home. The Erusin typically lasted 1 year. During that time, the bride continued living with her family, but legally, she already belonged to her husband. If he died, she was a widow. If she were found to have broken her covenant with another man, it was considered a grave transgression, and under the law, the penalty was death. The second phase was called Nisuin, the wedding. The groom would come to the bride's home, usually at nightfall, with a festive procession. He would bring her to his house. They would begin their life together, and from that moment on, they lived as full husband and wife. Mary was in the Erusin phase when she received the angel's visit, legally joined to Joseph, but still living in her father's house, still a virgin, waiting for the day when Joseph would come to take her to his home. Joseph was probably older than her. The customs of the time typically joined girls of 12 to 14 with men of 20 to 25, not the white-haired elder that medieval art would portray, in an effort to emphasize Mary's lifelong virginity in the Christian tradition, but certainly significantly older than she was. He was a Tecton, a builder who worked primarily with stone, a respectable craftsman, not wealthy, but not in extreme poverty either. He had a trade. He could provide for a family. He was a worthy match for a girl from a family without special resources. And most importantly, he was a devout man. The Gospels call him righteous. In the Jewish context, that meant someone who observed the Torah carefully, who fulfilled his ritual obligations, who genuinely feared God. When Mary was found to be with child during the Arusin, Joseph faced an impossible decision. Legally, he could bring a public accusation against her. Under the prescribed law, the consequences could be fatal, but he was righteous in the deepest sense, merciful as well as lawful. Matthew tells us he decided to dissolve the union quietly, to write the certificate of dismissal without making the reason public. This would protect Mary's life, though it would leave her as a separated woman, disgraced, carrying a child whose origins could not be explained in a society where that was a sentence of lifelong marginalization. But before he could act, he had his own encounter with the divine. An angel in a dream explained the inexplicable, and Joseph made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He completed the Nisuin. He brought Mary into his home. He protected her with his name. He gave her son the legal standing that would shield him from the burden of being considered illegitimate. This act of moral courage is extraordinary. In a society where honor was everything, Joseph chose the public shame of bringing into his home a woman who appeared to be carrying another man's child. He chose the whispers, the stares, the assumptions, and Mary, this girl of 14 or 15 years old, passed from her father's house to Joseph's house, carrying in her womb the child who would change the world. Luke describes the Annunciation with such liturgical familiarity that we have lost its profound impact. But let us consider what is actually happening here. A 14-year-old girl, alone, in a village where everyone knows everyone, and everyone watches everyone. In a society where a woman's conduct was carefully guarded and governed by strict social codes, and she receives a message announcing that she will conceive a child. Not after the Nisuin, when she finally lives with her husband. Now, immediately, by the power of the Holy Spirit, yes. But that does not change the visible reality. She will be with child before beginning her shared life with Joseph. Mary understands instantly what this means. Her question is not theological. How will this be since I have not known a man? It is practical. It is immediate. It is the question of someone who knows exactly what the law prescribes for a betrothed woman found to be with child. Deuteronomy 22:23 through 24 is explicit. If a young virgin is pledged to be married to a man, and another man finds her in the city and lies with her, you shall bring them both out to the gate of that city and stone them to death. This form of execution was not swift. The condemned was brought to an elevated place. The first witness would push her from above. If she survived the fall, the second witness would cast a heavy stone. If she still lived, the entire community would take part until the sentence was carried out. It was a punishment designed to be public, humiliating, and final. This is what Mary was risking with her yes, when she answered, "Behold, I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be done to me according to your word." She was not reciting a pious phrase of passive surrender. She was making the most courageous and dangerous declaration a young Jewish woman could possibly make. She was choosing to risk everything, including her life. She was choosing the certainty of public shame, because Even if Joseph protected her, even if she escaped execution, everyone in Nazareth would count the months between the wedding and the birth. Everyone would know. Everyone would whisper. Her fiat was an act of radical rebellion against everything her society expected of a young woman. Silence, passive obedience, protection of reputation at all costs. It was the response of an Anawim, of someone who had nothing to lose except her life, and who trusted that the God who had promised to liberate the poor would actually keep his word. For centuries, we have romanticized the Annunciation. Golden paintings of a serene virgin receiving divine news in a luminous room. Celestial music, peace. The reality was probably much closer to this. A terrified teenager in a dark cave house in Nazareth, processing the news that her life had just become complicated in ways that could get her killed, choosing to trust anyway. And that decision, made in a moment where terror and faith were completely intertwined, changed the trajectory of human history. After the Annunciation, Mary did something surprising. She did not stay in Nazareth waiting for her belly to grow and the whispers to begin. She left. She walked 150 kilometers to the south, toward the hills of Judea, toward the home of her cousin Elizabeth. The journey took 4 or 5 days. A pregnant teenager traveling most likely in a caravan, sleeping outdoors, eating little, walking 30 kilometers a day under the Judean sun. When she arrived and was greeted by Elizabeth, something extraordinary poured out of her. Not a conventional greeting, not small talk, a complete hymn, theologically sophisticated and radically subversive. The Magnificat. My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, because he has looked upon the lowliness of his servant. From now on, all generations will call me blessed, because the Mighty One has done great things for me. Up to this point, conventional piety. But then it turns. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the mighty from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. This is not a hymn of pious resignation. It is a song of social revolution. He has brought down the mighty from their thrones. In a world where Rome ruled through imperial violence, where the Herods governed Judea as puppet tyrants, where the temple priests collaborated with the occupation, this phrase was not abstract theology. It was dangerous political prophecy. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. In an economy where 90% of the population lived on the edge of survival, while a small elite accumulated obscene wealth, this was a direct call for economic redistribution. The Magnificat has actually been banned at multiple points in history. During the Argentine military dictatorship of the 1970s, the mothers of Plaza de Mayo recited it as an act of resistance. The regime declared it subversive and banned its public recitation. In Guatemala, during the Civil War, possessing a copy of the Magnificat could be used as evidence of communist activity, because this hymn, proclaimed by a pregnant teenager 2,000 years ago, contains a vision of the kingdom of God that is radically opposed to every human kingdom. It is not a kingdom where the powerful become more powerful. It is a kingdom where they are brought down. It is not a kingdom where the rich accumulate more. It is a kingdom where they are sent away empty. It is not a kingdom built on hierarchies and domination. It is a kingdom where the humble, the Anawim, those who have nothing, are lifted up. Mary absorbed this vision from the scriptures she had memorized, from the prophets who spoke constantly of justice for the poor, from the Psalms that promise God hears the cry of the oppressed, from the canticle of Hannah, who centuries before had proclaimed nearly identical themes. But she did not repeat it mechanically. She made it her own. She gave it her own voice. She proclaimed it in the first person as someone who had experienced it personally. He has looked upon the lowliness of his servant. She was living proof that God chooses the small ones, that the promises were not for the powerful in Jerusalem, but for poor teenagers in Nazareth. And this song, born in the meeting of two pregnant women in a house in the hills of Judea, has become one of the most recited texts in all of Christian history. Every day, in monasteries around the world, the Magnificat is sung at Vespers. Millions of times across 2 millennia, the words of a 14-year-old girl, repeated by countless voices, keeping alive the memory that the God of Israel stands on the side of the poor. Close your eyes for a moment. The ground beneath your feet is packed earth. The air smells of oil lamp smoke and damp stone. Outside, the sound of grinding stones announces the dawn. A girl kneels in front of the mill. Her hands already know the movement. Forward, back, circular. The grain becomes flour. The flour will become bread. The bread will sustain life. One more day. She does not yet know that her name will be the most spoken name in history. She only knows that she must grind the grain, carry the water, bake the bread, do the work that never ends. This is Mary, not the golden icon, not the heavenly queen, the teenager from Nazareth who said yes when everything around her was saying no, the woman who ground grain, wove tunics, and raised the child who would change the world. The years no one recorded, the work no one valued, the life that shaped the woman who changed history. What aspect of Mary's life has surprised you the most? The very real risk of the Annunciation? The invisible work of the mill and the loom? The revolutionary content of the Magnificat? The extreme poverty of Nazareth? Leave it in the comments. And if this video has helped you see Mary in a more human way, closer, more real, please share it. Next time, we will continue her story. The birth in Bethlehem, the flight into Egypt, the silent years back in Nazareth, and the day she watched her son die on a Roman cross. Until then, from a cave house carved into the rock of Galilee, from the well where she carried water, from the world that shaped the woman who changed the history of the world,